The challenge begins. The alien general stood tall on the command deck, his cold, glowing eyes scanning the human cadets below him. His alien soldiers lined up around him, all of them sneering at the sight. They were the best of the best, trained for decades in every kind of combat and survival. And these humans, they were nothing more than weak, fragile creatures, completely out of their depth. The general let out a low laugh. "You actually think you can survive my training?" His voice echoed through the room, mocking them. "I have seen the greatest warriors in the galaxy fall, and you are nothing compared to them." The human cadets stood in rows, facing him. They were young, some barely out of their teens, but there was something about them, something that made the general pause. It wasn't strength, it wasn't skill, it was something deeper. He couldn't put his finger on it, but he quickly pushed the thought aside. Humans were weak. That much was clear. "Cadets," a booming voice shouted from behind the general. The commander of the human forces stepped forward. He was a seasoned veteran of the Earth military, but he wasn't the one the cadets needed to fear. "Your first trial begins now." The alien general stepped aside, his eyes glinting with amusement. He motioned toward the massive doors behind him, which slowly opened to reveal an enormous, unforgiving landscape. Beyond the doors lay the arena, the most dangerous survival course the galaxy had ever known. Alien creatures from every corner of the universe roamed free in this deadly environment. The general's soldiers had failed here before, but humans? They wouldn't last 10 minutes. "You will survive in this environment for 72 hours, the human commander explained. "Only those who complete the trial will continue. Those who fail will be sent home." The cadets exchanged nervous glances, but none of them spoke. They all knew what was at stake. For most of them, this was the only chance they'd ever get. The general watched as the human cadets filed into the arena, their faces a mix of fear and determination. He chuckled softly to himself. Suspense builds. As the last human entered the arena, the heavy doors slammed shut behind them with a deafening sound. The alien general turned to his soldiers, a confident smile spreading across his face. "Watch this," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "In a few hours, they'll be begging for mercy." The cadets were now scattered across the terrain, each one given different starting points. The arena was designed to be a nightmare. Harsh weather conditions, dangerous terrain, and deadly creatures lurking at every corner. It was designed to break even the strongest of warriors, to test their physical and mental limits. The general had seen countless beings enter the arena, but no one had ever lasted long. The cadets, however, were different. They weren't used to this kind of environment, but they were used to fighting. They were used to surviving against all odds. The general hadn't counted on that. The first challenge. The first test came quickly. A massive alien beast, standing 10 feet tall with razor-sharp claws and glowing red eyes, appeared from the shadows. It charged straight toward the nearest cadet, a young woman named Lieutenant Sarah. The general laughed to himself. She didn't even have a weapon. What was she going to do? Run. But Sarah didn't run. Instead, she ducked low, just in time to avoid the creature's claws. With lightning speed, she grabbed a sharp rock from the ground and threw it straight at the beast's eyes. The rock struck its target with a sickening thud, temporarily blinding the creature. It roared in pain, stumbling back. Sarah didn't waste time. She grabbed the nearest branch, using it as a spear. The alien beast was blind with rage, swinging its claws wildly. But Sarah was faster. She lunged forward, her spear sinking deep into the creature's side. It let out one last screech before collapsing to the ground, dead. The general's eyes widened in surprise. He had expected the cadets to panic, to freeze in fear. But Sarah, she had acted without hesitation, using her environment and her wits to survive. The general clenched his fists, growing more irritated. This was supposed to be easy. Why were they still alive? Suspense builds. Sarah took a deep breath, wiping the sweat from her forehead. Her heart raced, but she had no time to rest. There were more challenges ahead. The other cadets had started to notice her victory and began to move with more purpose, their fear turning into determination. Meanwhile, the general's soldiers were keeping a close eye on the human cadets from the observation decks. They were all shocked. Some of them had started to whisper among themselves. "Did you see that?" one soldier asked, his voice full of disbelief. "She took down the beast with nothing but a rock and a branch." "I didn't think humans were capable of that," another soldier murmured. The general growled, silencing them. He was not about to let these cadets embarrass him in front of his army. He turned to the commander of the human forces, who stood silently nearby, watching the event unfold. "Don't get comfortable," the general muttered. "This is just the beginning. They'll all break eventually." But deep down, even the general wasn't so sure anymore. The turning point. As the hours passed, the cadets faced more dangers: alien creatures, harsh terrain, and even unpredictable weather patterns that seemed to come out of nowhere. The general watched, waiting for the inevitable collapse. But instead of falling apart, the humans were growing stronger. They worked together, sharing resources and using their limited supplies in ways the general hadn't thought possible. One of the cadets, Corporal James, had managed to find a hidden stream in the middle of a dense forest. He used it to create a water source for the others. Another cadet, Private Mia, had used her medical training to treat an injured comrade, keeping him alive until help arrived. And yet another cadet, Sergeant Mark, had rigged a makeshift trap to catch food, ensuring they wouldn't starve. The general could feel the frustration building inside him. This wasn't supposed to happen. These humans, these weak creatures, were surviving. They were adapting. They were fighting back. The general's doubt. It wasn't just their physical strength. It was something deeper, something that made them keep going when all seemed lost. The general had thought they would be easily crushed. Instead, they were proving that they could endure more than he had ever anticipated. For the first time, doubt crept into the alien general's mind. He had underestimated humanity, and it was beginning to look like that might be his greatest mistake. The alien general stood at the command center, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. His eyes narrowed as he watched the screens showing the human cadets scattered across the alien jungle below. The sun was setting, and the temperature had already dropped. The creatures of the jungle had started to stir, moving through the thick underbrush. 72 hours, the general muttered under his breath, looking at the timer counting down on the screen. They won't last that long. The first trial had begun, and it was clear the humans were out of their element. But the general wasn't worried. Not yet. He had seen creatures much tougher than these humans fail this trial. The jungle was a living nightmare, filled with deadly creatures, poisonous plants, and unpredictable weather patterns. Only the strongest survived. The cadets had no idea what they were up against. The jungle awakens. As night fell, the cadets spread out into the jungle, determined to find shelter and food. The creatures that roamed the jungle were fierce, each more terrifying than the last. Some had scales like armor, others had claws that could rip through metal. But it wasn't just the beasts they had to worry about. The environment itself was an enemy. The trees were massive, their twisted roots threatening to trip them at every step. The ground was uneven, with deep ravines and quicksand ready to swallow the unwary. The air was thick with humidity, and the temperature dropped rapidly as the sun disappeared behind the horizon. The first sign of danger came when Private Mia, one of the younger cadets, let out a scream. She had stepped into a nest of venomous alien creatures, their spiked bodies glowing in the dark. They were fast and deadly, their stingers aimed at her heart. But instead of panicking, Mia acted quickly. She grabbed a nearby rock and hurled it at the creatures, distracting them long enough to make her escape. Breathing heavily, Mia backed away, her heart racing. She could hear the creatures hissing, but they didn't follow. For a moment, she thought she might have escaped, but that feeling of safety was short-lived. A low growl echoed through the jungle. From the shadows, an enormous creature emerged, its massive body covered in spiked armor. It looked like a cross between a lion and an insect, with powerful legs that could crush boulders. The general watched as Mia stood frozen, her mind racing for a plan. She had no weapon, no way to fight this beast. The general laughed to himself. "She's dead," he said to himself, his voice cold and certain. A test of wits. But Mia wasn't dead. She wasn't even close to giving up. She had been trained for moments like this, trained to think, to survive. Her eyes scanned the area. She couldn't outrun the creature. It was too fast, and she didn't have enough time to find cover. But there was something she could use. A huge tree loomed overhead, its branches thick with leaves. Mia took a deep breath and bolted for the tree, her legs pumping as fast as they could carry her. The beast roared behind her, but Mia was too quick. She reached the tree and grabbed a thick vine hanging down. Without hesitation, she swung up into the branches just as the creature lunged forward, snapping its claws where she had just been standing. The general's smirk faded as he watched Mia climb higher into the tree. The beast couldn't follow. Mia had outsmarted it. She had used the environment to her advantage, thinking quickly and staying calm under pressure. For a brief moment, the general felt uneasy. Could it be that these humans had more in them than he thought? Teamwork in action. Elsewhere in the jungle, Sergeant Mark and Corporal James were working together to find food. The jungle was dense, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. They had already encountered a few dangerous creatures, one of which had nearly taken off Mark's arm, but they were determined to push on. They had learned quickly that staying together was the best way to survive. Mark spotted a small clearing ahead. The air smelled fresh, and he thought he could see something resembling edible plants. He motioned for James to follow him. But as they approached, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. A massive alien worm, larger than any human, erupted from the ground, its enormous mouth gaping wide. The two cadets barely had time to react. James grabbed a nearby branch, swinging it like a club to strike the worm on its soft underbelly. The creature screeched in pain, but it wasn't enough to stop it. The worm snapped its jaws toward James, but Mark shoved him out of the way, taking the full force of the attack. For a moment, Mark lay on the ground, stunned. James scrambled to help him up, but the worm was already charging again, its massive mouth aimed directly at Mark. There was no time to think. James made a split-second decision. He grabbed a jagged rock from the ground and hurled it directly into the creature's mouth. The rock hit with incredible force, causing the worm to choke and writhe in pain. For a few moments, it was disoriented, and Mark managed to scramble to safety. Together, the two cadets worked quickly, using everything they had to drive the creature back into the ground. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. The worm finally retreated, burrowing back into the earth with a shriek. Breathing heavily, Mark and James exchanged a quick glance. They had done it, but they knew they couldn't afford to slow down. They had survived, but only just. The jungle would not forgive them if they let their guard down. General's growing concern. As the cadets continued to survive, the alien general's frustration grew. He had watched the humans face trial after trial, and with each challenge, they seemed to adapt. The creatures were getting more dangerous, the weather more unpredictable, but the humans weren't giving up. In fact, they were thriving. "You said they wouldn't survive the night," one of his soldiers muttered, watching the monitors. The general scowled, his fists clenching. "Don't get ahead of yourself. This is just the beginning. They'll break. They have to." But deep down, a small voice in his mind was beginning to wonder. Maybe these humans weren't as weak as he had thought. Maybe they were something more. The first glimpse of hope. Back in the jungle, Mia had managed to find shelter high up in the trees, where she could rest for a moment. She had made it through the worst of the night, and the morning sun was starting to rise. As the light filtered through the leaves, she looked around, seeing the others starting to regroup. They had made it through the first night. They were alive. Mia's eyes narrowed as she looked toward the horizon. They weren't just surviving. They were learning, adapting, and overcoming. And she knew one thing for sure. They weren't giving up. And if the general thought they were weak, he was about to learn the hardest lesson of all. Humanity was not to be underestimated. The sun had risen high over the alien jungle, its harsh rays cutting through the thick canopy above. The human cadets had made it through the night. No small feat in a place like this. But they were far from safe. The jungle was only the beginning. The true test had just begun. The cadets had barely rested when they heard the voice of the human commander booming through their communication devices. "Listen up, cadets," the commander said, his voice sharp. "The next phase of your trial is about to begin. Get ready for the combat course. You will be fighting against trained alien soldiers. These warriors are the best the galaxy has to offer. Some of them are bigger, stronger, and faster than you. Others are trained in every weapon imaginable. You will face them one-on-one. The goal is simple: survive." The cadets exchanged nervous glances. The jungle had been dangerous, but it was nothing compared to what awaited them in the combat arena. They had seen the alien soldiers before, distant, towering figures with muscles like steel, faces covered by dark helmets, and weapons that hummed with deadly power. Now, they would have to fight them. Alone. The arena awaits. The cadets were herded into the arena, a massive dome-shaped structure that seemed to stretch endlessly into the sky. The floor was made of smooth black metal, cold and unyielding. In the center, a series of raised platforms hovered above the ground, each one set for combat. The air was thick with tension as the cadets lined up, staring at their opponents, alien soldiers waiting to tear them apart. The general stood at the observation platform, looking down at the cadets with disdain. He had seen this trial many times before, and he knew the outcome. The humans didn't stand a chance. They were too weak, too slow, and too inexperienced. His alien soldiers would crush them without breaking a sweat. "You all know what's at stake," the general's voice echoed over the loudspeakers. "Survive or be eliminated. I will be watching closely." The cadets didn't speak. They couldn't afford to. They had no choice but to face the battle ahead. The countdown began, ticking away the seconds as they prepared for the first fight. The first fight, Lieutenant Sarah's test. Lieutenant Sarah was the first to be called. Her heart raced, but she didn't show it. Her eyes locked on the towering figure in front of her, a massive alien soldier with a broad chest and glowing green armor. The soldier's helmet obscured its face, but the eerie sound of its breathing echoed through the arena. "You'll be dead in seconds," the soldier's voice growled, distorted by the helmet. Sarah didn't respond. Instead, she focused on the task at hand. The general had underestimated them before, and she wasn't about to let him do it again. She had trained for this moment. Every fight, every obstacle had led to this. The bell rang, signaling the start of the fight. The alien soldier charged at Sarah with terrifying speed. Sarah was quick on her feet, dodging the soldier's first strike, a crushing punch aimed at her face. She rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding a second blow that would have shattered her ribs. The soldier was strong, but Sarah was fast. She darted in and out of the soldier's reach, using her agility to stay one step ahead. The soldier swung its massive weapon, a long, jagged spear, at Sarah's head. She ducked just in time, her heart pounding. She couldn't keep dodging forever. She needed a plan. Her eyes darted around the arena. The ground was covered in broken pieces of debris, remnants of previous battles. One of the pieces caught her eye, a sharp metal shard buried in the dirt. It was small, but it could be useful. Sarah feigned a stumble, falling backward as if she had lost her footing. The soldier charged forward, eager to finish her off. But as it closed in, Sarah grabbed the shard from the ground and hurled it at the soldier's exposed side. The shard buried itself deep into the soldier's armor, just beneath the shoulder guard. The alien soldier howled in pain, stumbling back. Sarah seized the opportunity. She lunged at the soldier, using all her strength to drive her knee into its gut. The force knocked the soldier off balance, and Sarah followed up with a swift kick to its head, knocking it to the ground. Breathing heavily, Sarah stood over the fallen soldier, her chest heaving. She had won, but at what cost? She knew the battle was far from over. There would be more fights, more enemies, and she had no idea how many would survive. The general's surprise. From his vantage point, the general watched with wide eyes. He had expected the human to fail, to be crushed beneath the power of his elite soldier. But instead, Sarah had done the impossible. She had won. And now, he wasn't so sure of his earlier assumptions. The general's fingers tightened around the railing in front of him. He had underestimated the humans, but he wouldn't make that mistake again. If they were going to survive, they would have to prove it. Again and again. He turned to one of his soldiers. Increase the difficulty. We're not giving them an easy victory. The soldier nodded, and a new series of combatants were released into the arena. This time, the stakes were higher. These soldiers weren't just elite. They were the best of the best. If the cadets thought they could survive this trial, they had another thing coming. The second fight, Corporal James's test. Next, it was Corporal James's turn. He had watched Sarah's fight from the sidelines, his mind racing. If she could do it, so could he. He wasn't going to be outdone. His opponent was a large reptilian creature, its scales glistening in the light. It had 3 eyes, a massive tail, and claws sharp enough to tear through steel. The creature let out a guttural roar as it lunged toward James, its claws slashing through the air. James didn't flinch. Instead, he took a deep breath and dove into action. The creature's claws narrowly missed him as he slid beneath its legs. He grabbed a piece of jagged rock from the ground and swung it at the creature's side, hoping to get a lucky hit. The rock struck its scales, but it barely made a dent. The creature turned quickly, swinging its tail at James. He dodged just in time, the tail missing by inches. The creature was fast, much faster than anything James had fought before. But he had an advantage. He was smarter. He could outthink this creature. He noticed something. The creature's movements were predictable. Its tail was a powerful weapon, but it swung it in the same arc every time. James started to use that to his advantage, dodging and weaving to get in close. With one final burst of energy, he sprinted toward the creature's legs and thrust the rock deep into its underbelly. The creature let out a deafening scream, rearing back in pain. It thrashed wildly, but James kept his grip tight, pushing the rock deeper. Finally, with one last scream, the creature collapsed, its massive body crashing to the ground. James stood, breathing heavily, staring at the fallen creature. It wasn't easy, but he had won. The general's growing anxiety. The general stood at his observation post, his eyes fixed on the screen. The humans were doing better than he had expected. In fact, they were winning. He had pushed them hard, testing them with the toughest opponents, but the humans kept fighting back. Each victory, each success, made him question everything he thought he knew about them. Impressive, he muttered under his breath. But it's not over yet. The cadets had proven they could survive the jungle. Now they had proven they could hold their own in combat. But the general knew something they didn't. The hardest trials were yet to come. The general's fingers tightened around the railing in front of him. He had underestimated the humans, but he wouldn't make that mistake again. If they were going to survive, they would have to prove it. Again and again. He turned to one of his soldiers. Increase the difficulty. We're not giving them an easy victory. The soldier nodded, and a new series of combatants were released into the arena. This time, the stakes were higher. These soldiers weren't just elite. They were the best of the best. If the cadets thought they could survive this trial, they had another thing coming. The second fight, Corporal James's test. Next, it was Corporal James's turn. He had watched Sarah's fight from the sidelines, his mind racing. If she could do it, so could he. He wasn't going to be outdone. His opponent was a large reptilian creature, its scales glistening in the light. It had 3 eyes, a massive tail, and claws sharp enough to tear through steel. The creature let out a guttural roar as it lunged toward James, its claws slashing through the air. James didn't flinch. Instead, he took a deep breath and dove into action. The creature's claws narrowly missed him as he slid beneath its legs. He grabbed a piece of jagged rock from the ground and swung it at the creature's side, hoping to get a lucky hit. The rock struck its scales, but it barely made a dent. The creature turned quickly, swinging its tail at James. He dodged just in time, the tail missing by inches. The creature was fast, much faster than anything James had fought before, but he had an advantage. He was smarter. He could outthink this creature. He noticed something. The creature's movements were predictable. Its tail was a powerful weapon, but it swung it in the same arc every time. James started to use that to his advantage, dodging and weaving to get in close. With one final burst of energy, he sprinted toward the creature's legs and thrust the rock deep into its underbelly. The creature let out a deafening scream, rearing back in pain. It thrashed wildly, but James kept his grip tight, pushing the rock deeper. Finally, with one last scream, the creature collapsed, its massive body crashing to the ground. James stood, breathing heavily, staring at the fallen creature. It wasn't easy, but he had won. The general's growing anxiety. The general stood at his observation post, his eyes fixed on the screen. The humans were doing better than he had expected. In fact, they were winning. He had pushed them hard, testing them with the toughest opponents, but the humans kept fighting back. Each victory, each success, made him question everything he thought he knew about them. Impressive, he muttered under his breath. But it's not over yet. The Cadets had proven they could survive the jungle. Now, they had proven they could hold their own in combat. But the general knew something they didn't. The hardest trials were yet to come. The air felt thicker now. The Cadets had barely made it out of the death trap, but even as they caught their breath, they knew this was only the beginning. The metallic walls around them hummed with a faint energy, and the low rumble of machinery echoed through the tunnels. Their feet carried them forward, but their minds were reeling with exhaustion. They had fought robots, outsmarted traps, and battled enemies beyond their understanding, but they had no idea what awaited them next. A new voice crackled through the communication devices, this one deeper, colder, and more menacing than any before. "Congratulations, Cadets," it purred, dripping with malice. "You've survived all the tests so far. But now, it's time for you to face your real challenge. The true enemy, the one you've been groomed to fight, and fail." The Cadets froze. The air around them seemed to freeze, as if the very walls themselves were watching, waiting for them to make their move. "Your real enemy?" Sarah muttered, glancing around at her team. They had been through so much. What else could possibly stand in their way? Without warning, the walls of the corridor ahead began to retract, revealing a massive chamber. At first, it seemed empty, just another sterile, metallic room, like so many they had passed through. But as the last wall lifted, they saw something that took their breath away. It was a giant hologram of the Galactic Council, the rulers of the galaxy, the most powerful beings in the universe. But something was wrong. The hologram flickered, and instead of the calm, calculating faces of the council, the image distorted into something darker. The hologram shifted again, revealing not just the council members, but humans. The Cadets stared in disbelief. The images weren't random. They were faces they recognized. Officers who had disappeared months ago, Cadets who had been reported dead. They had seen these faces on recruitment posters, in training camps, and now here they were, alive, but twisted and warped. They were standing with the Galactic Council. The voice from earlier spoke again, this time with more malicious glee. Your real enemy isn't just the aliens, cadets. It's your own kind. They have betrayed you, abandoned you, and sold you to the highest bidder. They are your true enemies. The Council's greatest weapon isn't the alien soldiers. It's you. The betrayal unveiled. The image of the Cadets officers warped again. This time, they were no longer standing with the Council. Instead, they were kneeling before a dark figure, an officer who towered above them. His face was hidden behind a mask, but there was no mistaking his body language. He was in charge. "He's one of ours," Mark whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. "One of the higher-ups in our military." The hologram shifted one more time, revealing the officer's name, Commander Stalvin. He had been the one to organize the mission, the one who had promised them victory, the one who had personally given them their orders. But now he was revealed to be part of a much darker plan, working alongside the Galactic Council to betray humanity itself. It hit the Cadets like a ton of bricks. The very people who had trained them, who had trusted them to defend humanity, had sold them out to the Alien Council. This wasn't a test. This was a trap. They had been sent to die, to be used as fodder for the Council's war games. "We need to get out of here," Sarah said, her voice low and filled with anger. "We can't trust anyone anymore." But before they could turn to escape, a loud hiss filled the room. From the darkness, a massive figure stepped forward, a figure that wasn't human. It was a mutant, a hybrid creature, part human, part alien. Its skin was a sickly gray, and its eyes glowed a menacing red. Its body was unnaturally tall, with twisted, malformed limbs that seemed to stretch and contort unnaturally. The creature spoke in a low, guttural growl, its voice filled with hatred. "You think you can escape?" it mocked. "You think you can fight back? The Galactic Council has seen your potential. You are the new breed. You will serve the Council, or you will die." The Cadets stood frozen, the full weight of their situation crashing down on them. The officers, their allies, had betrayed them. Their only hope had been shattered. And now they were faced with an enemy that wasn't just alien, it was something worse. The mutant strikes. Before anyone could react, the mutant lunged forward, its hands like claws reaching for Sarah. She barely had time to dodge before the creature slammed into the wall, causing it to crack and groan under the pressure. The force of the impact was enough to rattle their bones. "Move," Mark shouted, taking aim at the creature's massive chest and firing. The rounds hit, but they barely left a mark. The creature didn't flinch. Instead, it turned to Mark, its eyes blazing with rage. "You will regret that," it hissed, its voice almost gleeful as it advanced. The Cadets scattered, trying to avoid the creature's monstrous blows. It was too fast, too powerful. It wasn't just a mutant. It was a weapon, a tool created for one purpose, to destroy humanity's defenders. A battle for survival. "We have to stop it," Mia yelled. "We have to hit it in the weak spots." But finding those weak spots wasn't easy. The creature was covered in thick, armored plating that made it nearly invulnerable to their weapons. It was only when Sarah noticed something strange. Its chest was pulsating. Did she realize where they needed to strike? "Right there." Sarah pointed, her heart racing. "We need to hit it in the heart. That's the only way to kill it." The Cadets regrouped, working as a team to keep the mutant distracted. James used his grenades to create explosions that rocked the mutant's balance, while Mia and Mark focused on hitting its head with sharp shots, trying to weaken its defenses. Sarah, adrenaline coursing through her veins, moved swiftly. She grabbed one of the heavy rifles lying on the ground, adjusting the scope to focus on the creature's pulsating chest. With a deep breath, she fired. The shot landed with a deafening crack, and the mutant roared in pain. It staggered back, its hands clutching its chest, but it wasn't finished yet. With a final furious scream, it lunged towards Sarah, claws outstretched. But before it could reach her, a second shot rang out, a powerful blast that exploded through the creature's heart. The mutant collapsed, its body crumbling to the ground with a final, defeated thud. The aftermath. The cadets stood panting, their bodies sore, their hearts pounding. They had survived, but it had come at a cost. The truth about their mission, their betrayal by those they had trusted, had hit them harder than any alien could have. They had been pawns in a game, and they had only just begun to understand the scale of their enemies. But now, there was no turning back. "We need to leave," Sarah said, her voice steely. "We'll take down the council. Together." The general's voice echoed once again, its tone filled with venom. "You may have survived this round, humans," it taunted, "but you will never escape us. The war is just beginning." The room fell silent after the mutant's body collapsed to the ground. The cadets stood in the midst of the wreckage, their bodies bruised, their minds reeling. Their breaths were ragged, their adrenaline slowly fading. They had just fought a monster, but the true battle was far from over. Mark was the first to speak, his voice sharp despite the exhaustion that clung to him. "We can't just sit here. We have to move." Mia looked down at the mutant's lifeless body, still struggling to process the magnitude of what had happened. "We've been betrayed. We've been set up. How could they let this happen?" Sarah clenched her fists, her eyes burning with a mix of fury and determination. "They didn't just betray us. They betrayed everyone. Our families, our planet. The council, they're using us as pawns in their twisted game." The cadets had always believed that they were fighting for humanity. They were proud to serve, proud to protect. But now, the truth was clear. Humanity's leaders, the very ones who had sent them on this mission, had sold them out to the alien council. The council wasn't just their enemy anymore. Their own people were the true threat. "The council is using us as bait," James muttered, still shaking off the aftershocks of the fight. "We're supposed to die here. They want to crush our spirit before we even make it out of this facility." "But we're not dying here," Mark said, his eyes hardening with resolve. "Not today. Not ever. A plan begins." It was clear now. There was no going back. The only way forward was to confront the council head-on. They needed to escape this facility, warn humanity, and destroy the council's stranglehold on the galaxy. But that was easier said than done. The facility they were in was a maze of steel and reinforced walls, crawling with alien guards and more mutants. Their weapons were running low, and the chances of surviving another fight were slim. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, the cadets had no choice. They had no backup, no reinforcements. It was just them against the galaxy's most powerful forces, and they were determined to win. "We need to get to the central command room," Sarah said, pulling up a map of the facility on a nearby terminal. "It's the heart of this place. If we can take it down, we can shut down the security systems and get out." "But that's where they'll be expecting us," Mia pointed out, shaking her head. "The council will have their best soldiers there, waiting to tear us apart." "We'll have to fight our way through," Mark said grimly, grabbing his rifle and checking the ammo. "But if we get to the command center, we can turn the tide. We don't just escape. We fight back." The plan was simple, but it was their only chance. They would make their way to the command center, break through the council's defenses, and unleash everything they had in one final push. The final push. They moved quickly, using the shadows to avoid detection. The facility's halls were eerily silent, a stark contrast to the chaos that had surrounded them earlier. Every step they took brought them closer to the heart of the facility, and the heart of the council's control. But the silence was deceptive. As they rounded a corner, they were met with a sudden barrage of gunfire. A squad of alien soldiers, their faces hidden behind glowing helmets, appeared from the shadows. Without hesitation, the cadets returned fire, the air filling with the sharp cracks of weapons discharging. "Move! Move!" Mark yelled, ducking behind cover and firing at the advancing soldiers. Naya was the next to make a move. She rushed forward, sliding behind a series of crates and using them as a shield. The enemy was relentless, but so were they. One by one, the cadets picked off their attackers, working together like a well-oiled machine. They had trained for moments like this. They had trained to be better than their enemies. And now, they were proving it. But just as they thought they had gained the upper hand, a massive explosion rocked the hallway, sending them sprawling to the ground. The air was thick with smoke, and the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the other end of the corridor. A new figure emerged from the smoke, a towering alien general, clad in thick armor, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. He was no ordinary soldier. He was the true weapon of the Council, a being designed to crush humanity's resistance. "You thought you could escape," the alien general growled, his voice deep and filled with menace. "You thought you could challenge the might of the Galactic Council. You are nothing." The cadets exchanged wary glances. This was it, the final battle. The moment they had feared had arrived. The battle for survival. The alien general charged forward, his massive fists slamming into the floor with a force that shook the walls. The cadets scattered, each of them trying to stay out of the way of the beast's destructive power. "Get him in the weak spots," Mark shouted, his voice barely audible over the chaos. Maya fired at the general's armored chest, but the shots did little more than ricochet off the metal. The general's armor was nearly invulnerable, and his strength was overwhelming. Every punch he threw left craters in the walls, but the cadets didn't back down. They fought with everything they had. Sarah darted forward, aiming for the joints in the general's armor. She fired a carefully placed shot at the knee joint, and for the first time, the general staggered, throwing off its balance. "Now," Mark yelled, "hit him with everything." The cadets launched their final assault, using every weapon at their disposal. James fired a grenade directly at the general's chest, and the explosion rocked the hallway, sending pieces of debris flying in all directions. The general let out a deafening roar of rage, but he was weakened. The cadets didn't stop. They pressed the attack, each shot weakening the general further. Finally, with one last combined effort, they brought the alien general to his knees. With a final, desperate strike, Sarah shot a high-powered round directly into the weak point in the general's armor. The alien general screamed as it collapsed to the ground, its body crumpling in defeat. Victory at a cost. The cadets stood victorious, but the price was high. They were bruised, bloodied, and on the brink of collapse. But they had done it. They had taken down one of the Council's greatest weapons. But the war was far from over. The Council had countless other generals, other weapons. They had no illusions about the difficulty of the path ahead. But they had sent a message today, a message to the Council that humanity would not go down without a fight. "We're not done yet," Sarah said, her voice filled with determination. "Not by a long shot," Mark agreed, his face set in a grim line. The battle was far from over, but the cadets had made it clear they would fight until the last breath, no matter the cost. The cadets were battered, bruised, and bloodied, but as they stood in the smoldering remains of the command center, they couldn't help but feel a flicker of triumph. They had faced impossible odds, fought against monsters, and brought down one of the Council's deadliest generals. Yet their victory felt hollow. The battle was far from over. "Now what?" Maya asked, her voice hoarse, her eyes tired. She wiped the sweat and grime off her face, her hands trembling. "We've destroyed the command center, but it's only a matter of time before the Council sends more troops." "Yeah," Mark agreed, his voice low. "But this is just the first step. We've shown them that we won't go down without a fight." Sarah looked around at the wreckage, the shattered walls, and the bodies of the fallen soldiers, both human and alien. The smell of burnt metal and blood still lingered in the air. They had come here to die, to be used as fodder for the Council's war games. But instead, they had taken control of the situation. They had done what no one had expected. "We've got to warn humanity," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "If we can make it out of here alive, we need to get back to Earth. We need to tell everyone what's really going on." But as soon as the words left her mouth, a familiar, chilling voice echoed through the shattered room, its tone cold and filled with unrelenting malice. "So you think you've won, don't you?" The cadets spun around, their hearts skipping a beat. The hologram of the Galactic Council flickered to life once more, this time more menacing than before. They had been waiting for them, anticipating their move. The Council's true power. The figure in the hologram was no longer just a projection of the Council's generals or officers. This was the one they had been waiting for, the supreme leader of the Galactic Council. His face was hidden in shadow, but his presence radiated power, his voice unmistakably authoritative. "You're fools if you think you've broken us," the voice hissed. "We allowed you to get this far, cadets. It was part of the plan all along. You see, while you were busy playing hero, the real battle has already begun." The room seemed to darken as the hologram shifted, revealing a map of the galaxy. The Council had already moved their forces into position. The galaxy, humanity's home, was in the Council's grip. Entire fleets of alien warships were positioned in orbit above Earth, their weapons ready to unleash destruction at a moment's notice. "The Council's forces are already on their way to Earth," the voice continued, its tone almost amused. "You have no chance of stopping us. You're too small, too weak, and far too insignificant. This galaxy belongs to us." Sarah's heart sank. The Council had been preparing for this moment for far longer than they had realized. All the while, they had thought they were playing the game, but in reality, the Council had been moving the pieces on a much larger board. They had underestimated the enemy, and now Earth was at risk. The final decision. Sarah clenched her fists, the anger burning in her chest. "Not if we stop you first. You're in no position to make threats," the voice sneered. "I'll give you a choice. Surrender now, and you may live to see the rest of your kind fall to their knees. Resist, and you will all perish here. Your sacrifice will mean nothing." But the cadets were beyond fear. They had already lost everything. Trust, hope, even their own government had betrayed them. But they had something the Council could never take from them, their will to fight. "No surrender," Sarah said firmly. "We'll fight until the last breath. Humanity won't bow to anyone. We'll give them the fight of their lives," Mark added, his eyes flashing with determination. "We may be small, but we're not weak," James said, his voice filled with conviction. "And the Council made a huge mistake by underestimating us." The voice of the Council leader grew cold, almost dismissive. "Then prepare yourselves for extinction. You've made your choice." The last assault. With the Council's hologram disappearing, the cadets knew what had to be done. They had no choice but to make one final stand. The only way to stop the Council's invasion was to find their flagship and destroy it. If they could take down the heart of the Council's fleet, they might stand a chance of turning the tide. But getting there wouldn't be easy. They had already faced hell, and now they were headed into the jaws of it. "We need to find a ship," Sarah said. "Something fast. If we don't act fast, Earth will fall." "We'll find one," Mark replied, his voice resolute. "We've made it this far. We'll make it the rest of the way." With no other options, they began their journey through the war-torn facility, weaving through narrow corridors and avoiding enemy patrols. The sound of battle echoed in the distance as the Council's reinforcements began to arrive. They had only minutes to find a way off the planet. Finally, they'd reached the docking bay. A small, sleek ship sat waiting in the shadows, a prototype ship designed for covered operations. It wasn't much, but it was their only hope. As the cadets climbed into the ship, they felt the weight of what lay ahead. They were heading straight into the heart of the Council's armada, knowing that they might not make it back. But there was no turning back now. With one final glance at the planet that had been their home, the cadets launched the ship into the air, heading toward the Council's flagship. The battle for Earth, and for humanity's future was about to begin. A new beginning. As they hurtled toward the heart of the Council's fleet, Sarah knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just about survival. This was about taking back everything that had been stolen from them, their freedom, their future, and the future of every human alive. They weren't just fighting for themselves. They were fighting for every man, woman, and child on Earth. And they would stop at nothing to ensure humanity's survival.